Hello, everybody. Mr. J here. The shot heard round the world. With all this talk these days about greater potentials for conflict on an international level, I thought it would be kind of cool to look at what's going on in the world today through the lens of traditional American historical principles, the big events of how our nation got founded, and basically what the founding fathers would say in regards to the things that are happening right now. So the shot heard around the world, if you are unfamiliar with this, took place in April 1775 on the fields of Lexington and Concord. This shot heard around the world clearly is not literal. This is the shot where we, the people, will begin to take political power away from those that claim to be the ones to disperse the power, and we will take that yoke of responsibility upon ourselves, as the colonists had for about 150 years, on and off, give or take, ebb and flow, highs and lows of self-government over the previous 150 years, had learned to grown accustomed to. And after the British in the French and Indian War was won, extended a lot more influence over the American colonies, which ultimately led to the Revolution and a suspension of all of those English rights that American colonials had felt belonged to them. And they were willing to fight to preserve those rights. So that is the initial catapulting of American concepts of independence, rooted within the educated class of the Enlightenment, stemming from the Renaissance and tracing its roots back to classical thinking all the way to Egyptian foundations of civilization. Now, all of this requires a long, comprehensive, and historical understanding of the development of rights and liberty and the balance of proper relationships between the government and the governed. And whew, it's a lot to take in. But safe it to say, American colonials knew what was worth fighting for and preserved that independence by earning it. Now, this next slide demonstrates really what image should lay itself over all civilizations is the foundation of a hierarchical pyramid of power and order, whether that's drawn and used in any way to describe economic power, political power, or what have you. And however that pyramid may choose or being chosen to be divided by the person that is attempting to educate the people. In this context, I've chosen to give this image often to my students in the past, that American colonials were really fighting for the right to preserve their own sense of elitism. What they were being told by the upper class aristocracy in England, of which only 3% of the population of England could vote, yet it was the most democratic country in the world. That aristocratic class was telling the American aristocratic class that there was no way that they could be their equal. Long story short, the American founding fathers disagreed with that principle, organized the American Revolution, and ended up fighting and winning that. So, all for the right to establish the terms of equality that had been dictated to them by the king and parliament. Now, keep in mind, we did have allies in the English parliament known as the Whigs. And if you are unfamiliar with that history, go look it up. It's fascinating stuff. Now, it takes more in the understanding of classic Americanism. It takes more than just systems of government to be in place to maintain this proper balance and relationship. Most of the founding fathers spoke multiple languages, were extraordinarily educated. They could speak Latin, and they often had high ethical training in classics, and one that I had stumbled across through all the years of education is Cicero's essay on virtue and what does it take to be a good person? What are the character traits of a quality human being and a quality individual that would then have the discernment to exercise political power? Now, these character traits in individuals, Cicero summarized in a beautiful way of justice, that every individual needs to know the difference between right and wrong. And once that sense of justice is understood, then every decision made thereafter requires prudence, choosing right over wrong. In our world of corruption, you can kind of understand where this will be an important choice. Again, it does not matter if you have a democratic system or a communist system or it doesn't matter what kind of system you have. If the people that occupy the positions of power are rotten and make poor, prudent choices, you will have failure. The third, which will help, I suppose, prudence, is to have fortitude. That is the mental and emotional strength needed to overcome in life, because we will all face challenges, whether and temptations. Whether all of those can be overcome by the individual is a permanent test of our own individual character. And since you and God are the only two that will ever genuinely know what is in your own heart, this is why it becomes an imperative to have faith in a higher power. Otherwise, you become the master yourself. And if you become the master yourself and your own God, then you will choose and make sure that you can validate anything that you want. The last is of the character traits to discuss is temperance. Do we have the ability to control our passions and desires when tempted? The temptations of lust, wealth, whatever these temptations may be, to lie, cheat, or steal, or what have you. This is just a personal note, but I think my analysis on the most important of the commandments that seems to be violated so regularly is thou shalt not bear false witness. That's a fancy way of saying lying. And what we have today is a unbelievable number of people in positions of influence that just straight up lie. And what we are witnessing is the fallout of that reality. It's a character flaw, but yet those individuals are promoted within our system largely because the people have lacked the capacity for discernment anymore. And that is one of the things that I think genuine educators are trying to figure out how to revitalize. Now, the documents, once we have the character qualities of the individuals, not to say that any of these founding fathers are perfect. That is not the goal of this discussion. The goal is to understand the ingredients that went into the people and that went into the system to establish the ideal principles of the United States. We have made mistakes. We will continue to make mistakes. We have abused power. We have been corrupt. We have done all of these things. Yet at the very beginning of our nation, we established principles that we could hopefully live by. The Declaration of Independence Principles says that this contract exists between the governed and the government. And when government becomes abusive of the rights of the people and of the citizen, it is the duty and the obligation of the people themselves to alter and abolish the government and establish new government that can meet those same ends, protect the rights of the people. The second is the American Constitution. Now, if I take one diversion and say the one document that is not on here is the Articles of Confederation. This in-between document demonstrates to people that understand American history how important states' rights and localized authority was, that our first national government was set up to have the states actually be superior. and that the only way a national government would ever function in any authoritative way over the states is in war making powers and foreign policy and to regulate trade. That is about it. Now, the Constitution ratified in 1789 with a lot of fanfare and a lot of discussion, debate, and heated 50-50 voting, roughly, at some points in time during the discussion, granted greater power to the central government because of the dysfunctionality of the state governments when it came to holding the republic together. So a convention was held in Philadelphia to draft the plan that would lead ultimately to our federal constitution. Now, this thing had to be compromised on, and one of the greatest compromise embedded within the Constitution is the promise that the anti-federalists forced the federalists, who were the ones pushing for the federal Constitution, was to add a Bill of Rights. That the federal government or central government, national government, whatever you want to call it, could not ever, ever, which is interesting to say now since we see the violations so regularly, ever take away the first 10 rights of an American citizen as the authoritative political body of yourself. And those bills of rights obviously have been added to over time in our 27 different amendments to the American Constitution. So these are the foundation principles of the American system. High quality individuals in character traits, along with the knowledge of what it takes in the relationship of the government and the governed, also the historical knowledge of why our system was set up in the way that it was to attempt to preserve the rights of individuals. Now, this Bill of Rights, you can look at it, you can think of the modern era, and we don't have time to cover everything in one session, but simply stated, Amendment 1, freedom of speech. Do we have that today? No. We have censorship. And we have the censorship being done by the federal government in conjunction with corporations. So right away, our Bill of Rights is being violated by the very government itself that we pay taxes to. So, and the right to freedom of the press, for us, I guess that means the freedom of speech, and it also may mean the freedom to lie to the people. As we have found out more and more throughout the process of the modern revelations, the press has not been forthright with the people, largely because it has been corporatized. And freedom of assembly, free speech zones, really? And the right to petition your government. So if you go to your government and complain about something, I don't know, like the teaching of critical race theory and transgenderism in the classroom, you can be labeled by your federal government as an enemy of the state. Hey, this is where we are at. And the Second Amendment is there to protect all of the rights guaranteed in the First Amendment. So if negotiation and discussion fails in the preservation of those individual rights, then the right to bear arms and the citizens being guaranteed the right to protect themselves, not from gangsters, not from crime, not from being mugged, not from carjacking, none of those things, although that can be helpful. But the right to bear arms is specifically put in the Constitution so that the citizens would be able to have firepower against their own central government. Now, this can be mocked, this can be joked at, this can be laughed off by many, and it is, that the federal government's army and our military is too big for the people to fight it anymore. And I guess by that logic of reasoning, then we should forfeit our rights to defend ourselves with the utmost firepower that we can, and just give it that firepower up to the central authority. or let them decide what are the criteria for us to be allowed to have weapons to defend ourselves against them. This is the problem with understanding the Second Amendment from the traditional concept of its creation. Now, the quartering of soldiers, yeah, that's been a no-no and has not yet really happened. So hopefully that does not happen. Hopefully we do not have UN soldiers within the confines of the United States exercising international law, as that would be a violation of our Constitution. But that is a fear a lot of people do have. Searches and seizures, the rights of the accused, the rights to trial by jury, and limitations on punishment, your due process rights of all American citizens listed there in Amendments 4 through 8. A lot of those are being challenged right now. And seriously, everybody, the litigation, the hiring of lawyers and law firms intervening and manipulating and twisting the language of state and federal law in an effort to manipulate the Constitution to be so loosely constructed that it can actually mean surveilling the people 24/7, 365 without their consent as an accepted norm. This is where we're at. Now, Amendments 9 and 10 are to guarantee, this is the hilarious part, that nothing in the Constitution can be done by the federal government beyond what is listed in the Constitution itself. So Amendments 9 and 10 were to preserve the power to the states and to the people within those respective states, if it is not enumerated or written down in the federal Constitution. So frankly, so many of our laws and legislation that have grown the central authority over the numbers of years of American history, mostly in the post-Civil War era to the present day, are largely technically unconstitutional. So they can be challenged. They have successfully in the past. They have unsuccessfully in the past. It's just a reality of law, to the limited knowledge that I have of it. That federalism concept, if it's not in the Constitution, belongs to the states. We have simply been forfeiting most of our own individual authority and our state authority to the federal government over the years through greater taxation and greater reliance on federal aid to supplement and subsidize all the things that we have grown accustomed to in our lives. Now, the system, as I had mentioned to start all this out, was mostly pastoral, agrarian, was the American lifestyle until the post-Civil War era. Henceforth, most Americans owned land and were vested into the system. To be eligible to vote in our original system, Americans must have been property-owning men to be able to vote. Now, technically speaking, that also included men of color, surprisingly to a lot of people. As long as you owned property, you were eligible to vote. And over the years, during the Jacksonian age, is when the property qualifications were largely removed from the ability to participate in the political process. Contrary to a lot of emotional appeals put out there about the extension of the democratization process, it was not, the limits on voting was not solely based on race. It was based on the concept of an educated individual having the ability to discern right from wrong and make reasonable political choices that would have been responsible. Now, after universal male suffrage and property qualifications were removed, go read some classic Davy Crockett primary sources, and maybe I'll do a show on that later, and understand that politics completely changed at that point. The consumers of the political narrative and dialogue became much more suggestive to manipulation by mass press. And it's just the way that it is. this is a reality. And the addition of new voters throughout American history. First, we understand the eligible pool of voters increases with universal male suffrage. Then it will come with, after the Mexican American War, Mexican Americans will be granted the right to vote, Mexican American men. And then it will, after the Civil War, be African American men. Granted, there were obstacles, right, that we all know. And those we will discuss in different segments, but the extension of the right to vote grew there. And then finally, with the 19th Amendment, granted all women the right to vote. Ultimately, this progress of democracy and the democratization process can be a good thing, but it does not remove the need for the individual citizen to be highly educated in the truth of things if they're to be able to practice discernment that is going to be beneficial to the republic as a whole. If the system is largely based on manipulative corruption, deception, and lies, then it becomes an exercise in futility to attempt to politically exercise good judgment. So after the American Civil War, with the growth of the industrial economy, and largely what will happen is the internationalization of the monetary system and the growth of what will eventually become the American Federal Reserve and the resurrection of the old Bank of the United States that had been defeated by Andrew Jackson. The seesaw of banking power in the United States and the world is a whole nother rabbit hole, but of the highest priority for citizens to understand. Again, if they're going to understand what's happening in the modern day and also have an understanding of the changes throughout history that have led to the consolidation of power at the international level of the most influential people in the world are the international bankers and the agents of the international press. So, who do we get to hear are the arbiters of truth in all of the information that we, the people, consume? Who is sending those messages out there for us to consume as truth? Who is in control of the narrative? And who is in control of the financing of the status quo? Now, those are great questions. And if you're interested in the search for truth, you should probably begin to look in that general area and understand where the priorities are. Understand what is happening, because at the end of this journey, with the consolidation of information power and with the growth of the consumption of information via the internet and the highly regulated environment that already is a manipulated environment of truth, it's all the more important to pay very close attention. The final phase here to understand the political spectrum in a better way than looking at left-right paradigms and putting people in boxes and camps is to look at the political spectrum from the perspective of linear power. On one side is 0% government power, and at the high side is 100% government power. So it doesn't matter what form it takes. It doesn't even matter what symbology you are seeing there. It has no bearing. There can be benevolent dictators, there can be benevolent kings, there can be corrupt kings, there can be corrupt dictators, there can be murderous dictators and murderous kings, there can be murderous democratically elected people, there can be corrupt democratically elected people, there can be, it doesn't matter what system it is. Judge by the deeds of the individuals involved only if they can be verified as 100% fact. Short of that, we must reserve our judgment for the Almighty. He's the last that gets to say and that gets to judge the hearts of men. So now, let's see, what's one more here? I think I have one more to help understand and unpack the modern era. So again, how do we connect all of this fast forward to the modern era? It would really manifest in the American system in this paradigm that we are seeing. The world of globalization, the New World Order, many different names that it falls under, the World Economic Forum, the the aspects of the globalist driving force of consolidation of international power, which is mostly led by, in the United States anyway, and symbolized by the current administration of Joe Biden and previous Democrat presidents, as well as Republican presidents in the form of the Bush family. What we see growing in the United States today, and why it is so volatile and why it is so divisive, largely is because the threat that is perceived by the political uh, theater, really, of the manifestation of Donald Trump and the nationalists and so many of the different phenomena associated with it, it is pushing against that national narrative and international narrative of the people that have scripted the story and have controlled the money supply for a long time. If the name the Rothschilds ring a bell, that's how far back it goes, and then some. So, to have a comprehensive understanding of this narrative and to understand how the forces of globalism are weighing out against the forces of nationalism in this world, that is the real battle being waged. And so much of that war, we the people and the people of the world largely have such limited knowledge about. What we are allowed to be exposed to does not properly equip any of us to exercise discernment and critical thinking and decision making. We, the people of the world, are fed, force fed, truths, history, narratives, lies, manipulations that are knowingly being perpetrated. And we're forced to accept them as truth. These forces of globalism are running up against the forces that are trying to preserve individual liberty, the right to speak freely, the right to petition, the right to assemble peaceably, the right to bear arms, the right to worship in any way that you want, the right to due process, the right to being presumed innocent before being canceled. I mean, found guilty. Anyway, these are the ways that we can translate all of these concepts that we are seeing and the stress that we are living in currently and probably will continue to grow stress wise for the near future, until we, the people, are brought to the light a little more. And if you haven't noticed, there are more and more things that are happening that are bringing people to the light. So it's okay, no matter where you are on that journey, go toward the light. It's a much, much better place, safer place, more peaceful place, even though many of the truths that will lead you toward the light may challenge and may alter what you already believe.
So have a good one, everybody. I hope that helps. Take care.